I want to inject beauty and joy into the world, and I want to inject curiosity, and I want to inject confusion, and I want to inject the most like beautiful dream, in reality.
And today we're going to be talking about your career, your work, and your approach to everything that you do in various different contexts, from photography, fashion, music, printmaking, performance. And this multidisciplinary approach is very integral to your work. And I just want to hear more about why it's important to you to bring Queezy to so many different creative contexts.
Right. I work in many different disciplines, as you said. Like I work in, and I try to like research and like sort of improve and stretch myself within them. Like I'm not just doing photography, I'm not just doing video or fashion. Like I really am trying to like innovate in those areas and sort of like collage sort of all those pillars together to like create something new, something interesting, something that like maybe the world hasn't seen, so a lot of my work, I like to incorporate like myself in my work, like injecting in Queezy, as I would say, like right now, like I have Tandy in the background, which is a collage I did, which is a photograph that I multiplied. And then right now I'm collaging myself even further within the work, this could be a new work. So I always like encourage people to like not just stick to like one medium or thing. Like it's all I find it exciting when you like experiment with like and layer different things, because that's when you create something new and interesting. And this is what I find a lot in my work. Like when I oftentimes do all this collaging and then I like discover something that I never even imagined I would want to do. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, that's basically why I do with that. Put Queezy into work. Yeah.
And it's interesting that you bring up collage. Collage is such an important part of your work, and it's something that we'll touch on later when you talk about collage on the body and sculpting on the body through various fabrics and materials. But I want to just ask you about performing and why you're drawn to performing as well, because that is how a lot of people know of you.
Yeah, well, I started performing, like, I think that like big moment where I knew that I was performing was when I was in grade 7. I got to perform as Paris Hilton. Now, imagine a gendered kid that was labeled a boy on a stage in grade 7 acting as Paris Hilton with a dress and little fake sock boobies with a heel and a bag and a little dog in the purse and a really like fucked up wig, kind of like this one. You know what I mean? Like, it's a scary thing it was a scary thing for me then, but my drama teacher, she was like, I believe in you, just try it out. So literally went on stage, wore a dress by my mother, wore this big gold belt, green dress, gold belt, and I went on stage and I acted as Paris Hilton. But in that moment, I felt so at home and I felt like so me that I got to like act out a gender that I felt comfortable in, because like I identify as non-binary, but I definitely gear towards being more femme. Like definitely. And that's just like, that's who I am. And when I got to express that, I was like, wow, I can perform my gender in front of people. And then I started experimenting with that idea. I started experimenting with gender codes and sort of like, and researching like what all these things mean, you know. In varsity was amazing because I actually got to like develop and research gender so much that like when I started making art, I started using these like signifiers in my work, like, and playing with them and collaging them on top of one another, you know, taking things that are familiar and then remixing them. And that's what I really like in my work, using things that are familiar and then sort of like twisting them slightly, but still keeping it familiar, like my look today, you know. I have hair on, I have earrings, diamonds, some sort of top, a lipstick, and my face and my hands. You know, those things are familiar, but because it's not on a natural born woman, you know, it's sort of subverting that idea even, you know? And then it's like, so what's happening there, you know? And I always like that to bring that up in my work. Yeah.
Yeah,
You know, let
absolutely.
people let it cook in here, you know. Ultimately, what I'm trying to do is trying to see like, how do we evolve from this point? Like, do we grow wings, you know?
Hopefully.
Hopefully. Yeah.
And we've privately spoken a lot about gender and sexuality and gender and sexuality as it's portrayed and discussed in the media. And as a public figure who does appear in the press fairly often, how do you feel about talking about gender and sexuality in that kind of public forum?
Right. I get asked this question about like, what gender am I? You know, and sometimes I feel uncomfortable because it feels like I'm not asking all the straight people in the world, like, how straight are you? You know, what's between your legs? You know, what's under your shirt? And that makes me feel uncomfortable. You know what I mean? Like, so I have spoken about it in the past, but like, it's still, yeah, I don't know. I think specifically about me and how I identify is I'm so many things, you know. I'm a collage of things, you know, and I love that about myself. I love exploring those sides of myself, exploring, seeing what happens when I use all those different signifiers and mix them up, and then like something else poofs up, like this jacket's from the men's section, and like this was a headpiece, but I made it into a necklace. You know, it's not even attached, but you know, yeah, we make it up. We do it, you know. So explore, see what happens when you dye your hair this color, you know what I mean? Or wear a 40 Rand plastic wig. Wow. You
And
know?
make it look like 4,000 Rand.
Do you know what I mean? I just flipped her to the side. Yeah, I'm actually having fun. This is the first time I'm wearing this wig, by the way. So, all for you, boo. Exclusive.
It's an
Amie Soudien.
exclusive. And so much of your work is around fantasy, embodying
Yeah.
fantasy, and pushing the limits of what people expect or what people assume is possible. And in thinking about your photographic project, Bordelbeck, which was featured in Natal, could you talk a little bit about that project and for you, your thinking behind it, And then also for the people that don't know, what does borrelbeek mean?
Okay, borrelbeek, well, let's start off with that. Borrelbeek, if I'm correct, is when you have been drinking and you like, when you drink it too heavily and your mouth is a bit dry, you get borrelbeek. Or when you're thirsty for some alcohol, you'll get borrelbeek. So myself, Sandrine and Chadley, two other artists, came together and we were like, let's collaborate. We have a whole bunch of makeup, we have all this fabric. I've made like some pillows. I already had previously made some garments that I hadn't used yet.
Mm-hmm.
And we had 2 cameras, and we're just like, okay, let's go. So I was living in Sea Point at that point, and basically we're just like, let's do all the things we ever wanted to do, experiment, play around with different compositions, like shoot something fantastical in the engine garage parking lot, or standing on a heap of seaweed with a pillow and posing in a certain way, and just making the composition like fun and interesting, and sort of making it up on the spot. Do you know what I mean? But still having the intention of trying to create something magical and something surreal. So that's what we did. We shot all over Seep. We shot at the beachfront. We shot like at the park. We shot like in my apartment. We shot at the engine garage. Kind of what all this like is trying to say is basically like you can kind of to make beauty out of anything, really, And I think that was the most exciting part about the project, because the three of us hadn't really like made a big project like this before. And then we approached Natal, we sent in the images and they loved them. And then the rest is history. Like, yeah, but um, basically we just collaged like everything we had, like all these materials and fabrics onto the body in no specific way to create a new vision or new idea.
Yeah, and you're trained in fashion design and garment construction. You went to CPUT,
I
and
did.
in our last interview together, you described your creation of garments as, quote, kak cheap haute couture, which
Yes.
is brilliant. Um,
Yeah.
and and this being a way of talking about value and consumption, I think that was within the context of the fashion industry. But
Yeah.
your work has really evolved and developed since then. And Borrelbeek also, as you say, illustrates what you call collage on the body and sculpture on the body. And how would you approach your creation of garments today, and in thinking about your choice of materials, for example?
The thing with my garments, like a lot of the fabrics that I use are like more softer fabrics, like from plastic to like kwai lapis, like cheap offcuts or whatever. But what I like to do is I like to sort of like create volume or less volume and then collage it on the body. And then when I take the photograph, it sort of like cements the figure and it sort of creates this idea of sculpture. Like sculpture, the materiality in person is, a lot of people use brass, they use like hard metals. And I sort of wanted to play with this idea of what if I did the same thing? Like the photograph for me is kind of like I made the sculpture in person and then dipped it in resin, and it sort of like was frozen in time. And it sort of creates this like, it's that sculpture that's there forever, but it's in a photograph, and it's probably this big or humongous. You could always change the size, unlike maybe a brass sculpture that like maybe will stay like that forever. It will always keep its form. I wanted to sort of like make this like hard object more fluid, and sort of like play with all the dimensions that it lives in. So yeah.
Yeah, and there's one photograph in particular where you see the fabric being thrown in the air and that being captured.
Yeah.
There's something so playful and whimsical and beautiful about that.
I love that image because it reminds me of something like biblical, and like, so basically Chadley was supposed to be in the image, and then Sandrine threw the fabric in and was like sort of caught like
Yeah.
in the, and it sort of created this new storyline, like this sort of like this fabric was on fire and things were levitating and moving, and there was sort of like this action happening. And I love that, that's the whole thing about fantasy. It's like it can be any story.
Yeah. So I'm going to change tack a little bit and talk about where you like to stage your work. So you've mentioned, places that you've stayed in the past and how that's actually influenced the type of work that you make.
Yeah.
And when I first learned about your work as an artist, I was introduced to your photographs that you'd taken in your bedroom. And when I think of your series Ultimate Public Freakout, that's also staged in the home. And why is it important for you to work in domestic spaces?
Growing up as a young kid, I was fortunate enough to have my own room, and I got to be in that space to think and sort of get away from maybe the stresses that I was experiencing in life, or the stresses that I may have been experiencing in the home. It was my way of finding peace. So when I was young, I used to draw like almost every day. And that's how I started making art. And I knew that it was art. I knew that what I did and what I put down on that piece of paper was something that I loved. I'd only draw things that I loved, And then as I got older, I've always found myself in my room making these works, and it was my safe space. But yeah, I got older and then I started going out into the world, and I realized, okay, I can make art there too, But I love this idea of familiar things, and sort of this idea of like, because I've moved a lot, I've had many different homes, and like, what defines a home? Is it a bed? Is it a chair? Is it a couch? Is it pillows? And I love using those like signifiers, like in the background, like Ultimate Public Freakout. There's a couch, there's a fireplace, there's a carpet, there's a table, but then there's this thing that is like this glitch. There's this figure that seems familiar. It's shaped like a human body, but their skin is in plastic, and they're not saying it, and they're in a static movement, and then it's sort of like the viewer can see themselves in the figure, but then it's something else, and then that's sort of what I want to challenge as well, is that like, I want to challenge our physical form, and I feel like we hold on so dearly to our identities and never get to like free ourselves from that prison. I feel like a lot of people are hindered by identity, not out of choice, but because of work, that they have to dress a certain way, so it sort of channels into their daily lives. Or if they are in a specific field, they don't get to like sort of challenge this idea of self, which I feel like if we did, we could see so many weirder, crazier things of humanity, I just want to grow wings, guys. Okay, so I'm just like, come on, y'all, come, can we climb walls or something, you know?
And then on the other hand, you have this very uh, bold, space-claiming, public-facing work on the other end. As you said, as you grew up, you started to go out more and you discovered new things about yourself. How then do you feel about making work in public? And you often work in very public and what could be understood as quite like normal spaces, like you said. Could you talk a little bit about that?
I've been given like this amazing gift to put myself out there and be brave, and I acknowledge it. And it's allowed me to free myself from not being scared to make work in public spaces because it is quite daunting. A lot of times people think about what other people are going to say or do, but I realize that the fact of the matter is that, like, when you are in that public space, most times people are just thinking about themselves and what they need to do. So you can kind of just do it, you know? You can, like, perform in public. You can take a photo in public, you know, in South Africa and Cape Town. Um, uh, yeah, and I mean, I go all over Cape Town. I love challenging that idea of space because how I see the world is that it's all one thing, and it's an endless one thing to explore. You know, you can go anywhere. You know, we divide our world with spaces, with structures, with buildings, with systems. You know, I see through all of that, you know.
Yeah, and that ties in very closely to your performance, Vanguard, which was shot just before the pandemic in
Yeah.
Vanguard, Cape Town. And could
The
you
week
talk
before.
the week before?
Yeah.
And then our whole
So the
world changed.
Wednesday and then the Friday, the world changed. Yeah.
Sure. Could you talk about the performance, but also about what Vanguard means for you, and perhaps then drawing from that, for those who don't know, where is Vanguard and how does it sit within the geography of Cape Town?
Okay. So Vanguard falls under the Cape Flats and it sits right next to Athlone. A lot of people in Vanguard, Gatesville, a lot of them were forcibly removed from District 6 in the center of town, in the CBD. The city sort of moved people of color out and moved white people in, and it's still the case today. And my grandmother lived in Vanguard, and my father and aunt grew up there. And my father passed away. So for me to go back to Vanguard and commemorate this sort of space and time, I wanted to sort of inject joy into the area by me simply getting dressed in an orange neon dress with heels on and pink short hair and diamonds and jewelry, and sort of injecting this joy from seeing so much pain and decay in the area. But on that day, people were loving it. People were like, gang security was stopping the car, be like, come here. And then I went up to them and I was like, can I have an inchie then, you know? And maybe walk all the way over here. And yeah, Titi's hugging Titi's. Like, it was such a beautiful moment, and it did exactly what I thought it would do. I felt like I left a bit of myself there. I left a tribute to my father that had passed, a tribute to my grandmother that passed, a tribute to my grandfather that passed, you know. It was sort of like acknowledging my ancestors and sort of like injecting life into future people.
When I was watching the film, and the first few seconds of the film, you're in your mirror and you're doing your makeup, and then it cuts to you running across the sand, which is such a beautiful image. And there was something about the way that you were framed in the film and your figure in that space that really conjured up the images of QP in District 6 for me. I wanted to just talk about that lineage, you to QP, and that way of claiming space that we saw in the photographs in the exhibition Daughter of District 6.
So QP honestly is like one of my biggest idols because QP like is so close to me, being a queer person of color from Cape Town. I mean I didn't grow up in District 6, but I have family that lived there, that knew QP, you know, like it's even QP's story. QP like fell in love with a straight guy and they really were in love, and then they had to break up because he wasn't accepting of their femininity, you know, and they couldn't have children. And that was super sad, you know. QB couldn't live that full fantasy, you know, of wanting a family and wanting, you know, this is something that queer people face a lot, where they are second best, you know. QP was a performer in District 6 and would be at the front of the minstrels like band and the Kapse, and they would just like rule District 6. And what I loved about QP is that they were this really tough, strong, queer person that walked through the streets, dressed however they wanted to dress, you know, took all the shit, took all the bullshit, and went with it. And, you know, like growing up, like I had heard about QP, but I didn't fully know. And then when Daughter of District 6 came out and I saw the exhibition and I was there, I was like, oh my God, this is me. I know that I can put myself out there. I always put myself out there. I'm not afraid and I'm unapologetic about who I am. And a lot of queer people aren't able to do this. That's why I do it, you know. I'm doing it like for all my girls that can't do this. I'm putting my heart and soul out there when I'm all dressed up, you know. And I also don't get to do it all the time. But when I do it, it's going to be damn good. And I'm not going to flinch, you know. There's a saying in Cape Town, we say, skrik vir niks. So I just want all my angels to know that you shouldn't, you know, scared of nothing.